Hi all, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video series, we are going to see the Microsoft Azure Fundamental real-time exam questions. You can definitely expect some of these questions in your exam. So without any delay, let's get started. There are 4 different types of questions that you can expect in your AZ-900 exam. The first pattern is drag and drop. So here, you are expected to drag this service to the correct answer. For example, Azure Functions. So Azure Functions is a platform for the serverless code. So we are expected to drag the Azure Functions to this. And the same goes with these 3 services as well. Now let's move on to the next pattern. The second pattern is select the answer from the drop-down. So you have to select the correct answer from the drop-down list of options. So if you see here, we have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So Azure Virtual Machines comes under infrastructure as a service. So you are expected to select this answer. The next pattern is multiple choice questions. So you are expected to select the correct answer from the provided choices. For example, in which type of cloud model are all the hardware services owned by the third party and shared between multiple tenants? So the correct answer for this is public cloud. Moving on to the next pattern. The fourth pattern is yes or no questions. For example, Azure pay-as-you-go pricing is an example of CapEx. For this, the correct answer is no, because the Azure pay-as-you-go pricing is an example of operational expenses. And in this video, we are going to see all the questions of this pattern, that is yes or no. The first question is, you decide to create 2 virtual machines. Each virtual machine is of the size D2S V3. Would these machines always generate the same monthly cost? Pause the video here and check your knowledge before I get into the explanation. So, the cost of the virtual machines always depends on the running time of the virtual machine. So, if any of the virtual machine goes into a stopped or a deallocated state, then it doesn't incur any cost. So which means, though you have 2 virtual machines of the same size, it does not incur the same monthly cost. So the answer for this is no. The next question is, a company is planning on hosting an application on an Azure virtual machine. It needs to be ensured that the application hosted on the virtual machine is accessible from the internet over HTTPS. You decide to implement a DDoS protection plan. Would this satisfy the requirement? Pause the video before we get into the answer. DDoS protection plan helps to block the malicious traffic. So it actually helps to protect your infrastructure against DDoS attacks. So here, implementing a DDoS protection plan does not satisfy the requirement. So the answer is no. So the next question is, a team is currently planning on using Azure for hosting the resources. They are going to create users which would have access to the Azure resources. They want to implement multi-factor authentication for the users, or 2 valid methods for Azure multi-factor authentication include the picture identification and entering a passport number. So pause the video before we get into the solution. Okay. So basically, the methods that are available for this multi-factor authentication include a password, or using a Microsoft Authenticator app, or adding a trusted device, for example, a mobile, and you can get a code through an SMS or a voice call. So these are the available methods. So the answer for this is no. Okay, let's move on to the next question. If you plan to host a web application in the Azure Platform as a Service solution of Azure Web Apps, then you will have complete control over the underlying operating system. Yes or no? You can pause the video. So, Azure Web Apps is basically a platform as a service. So, in the platform as a service solution, we have control over the applications and the data, but not on the underlying infrastructure. So, operating system comes under the underlying infrastructure. So, the answer for this is no. So the next question is, a platform as a service PaaS solution provides full control on the operating system. So if you see the previous question, it's almost the same. So in the previous question, they have given a specific service which is Azure Web Apps, but here they are asking, like, for all the PaaS solutions, do we have the full control on the operating system? So the answer is obviously no. Moving on to the next one, a platform as a service solution provides additional memory to the apps by changing pricing tiers. So you can pause the video before we get into the solution. And yes, it is possible to add more CPU, memory, and the disk space. You can scale up by changing the pricing tier of the PaaS solution. So the answer for this is yes. I have also added a supporting link from the Microsoft documentation. You can also have a look on that to get more information. The next question is, a platform as a service solution can automatically scale the number of instances. So the PaaS solutions have the feature of autoscaling, so which helps to provide the ability to scale the platform automatically. So here the answer is yes. Moving on to the next one, you decide to create a virtual machine which is of the size D2S V3. If you plan to stop the virtual machine, will you incur any cost for the storage associated with the virtual machine? So you can pause the video before we get into the answer. So basically in Azure, storage is a separate resource and the storage has its own billing mechanism. So even if you stop the virtual machine, it will still incur the cost for the storage. So the answer is yes. Moving on to the next one, deploying your own data center is an example of CapEx. So if you are establishing a data center, it requires to purchase all the infrastructure upfront. So yes, deploying your own data center is an example of CapEx. The capital expenditure is an upfront costing, whereas the operational expenditure comes under pay as you go model. And you have to pay for virtual machine only when it is running and not during a stopped or a deallocated state. So that comes under the operational expenditure. But you also have a flexibility to reserve the capacity of virtual machines and pay an upfront cost, which means it supports the capital expenditure as well. So the answer for this is yes. Moving on to the next one. Your company plans to migrate all its data and resources to Azure. The company's migration plan states that only platform as a service solutions must be used in Azure. You need to deploy an Azure environment that meets the company migration plan. The proposed solution is you can create a Azure App Service and Azure storage accounts. Does this meet the goal? So Azure App Service is a platform as a service. However, the Azure storage account comes under infrastructure as a service. So here, since storage account is a infrastructure as a service, this doesn't meet the goal. And the answer is no. Your company plans to migrate all its data and resources to Azure. The company's migration plan states that only platform as a service solutions must be used in Azure. You need to plan to deploy an Azure environment that meets the company migration plan. The proposed solution is you create an Azure App Service and Azure Virtual Machines that have Microsoft SQL Server installed. Does this meet the goal? As discussed in the previous question, Azure App Service comes under Platform as a Service. However, Azure Virtual Machine that have Microsoft SQL Server installed comes under Infrastructure as a Service. So this event doesn't meet the goal, and the answer is no. Moving on to the next one. To build a hybrid cloud, you must deploy resources to the public cloud. So basically, a hybrid cloud is a combination of a private cloud and the public cloud. So it is required to deploy your resources to the public cloud. And the answer is yes. A private cloud must be disconnected from the internet. So private cloud means that the physical servers are managed by you and it requires to be connected to internet. So it's not true that it must be disconnected from the internet, and the answer for this is no. Moving on to the next one. Azure pay-as-you-go pricing is an example of capital expenditure. So as discussed earlier in the video, capital expenditure is upfront costing, whereas the operational expenditure comes under pay-as-you-go pricing. So here the answer is no.